opening statement started yesterday in the trial of El Chapo. The exact opening statement was, "Come on, who among us hasn't decapitated a few folks here and there?" CNN is suing President Trump so that reporter Jim Acosta may be allowed to return to the White House. And while they're at it, Democrats are suing so that President Obama might be allowed to return to the White House. And finally, following last week's election, half of the 24 Republicans who wrote Trump's tax plan will no longer be in Congress. They'll now have a lot more time for golf, gardening, and bathing in the tears of poor people. The Trump Report starts now.
You're tuned in to AfterBuzz TV, the ESPN of TV talk. Now, let the buzz begin.
Oh, that's right. Fire and rain throughout the news over the weekend. Welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Christian Bladt, joined by only the one and only Scott Moore.
Yeah.
That's right.
Ooh,
it's boys' night.
It's boys' night tonight, yeah.
Sorry, ladies. Take a back seat.
Not ladies' night tonight.
Not
here.
ladies' night tonight, but we will, of course, miss both Chelsea and Tamra, who will be back with us next week. So, yes, fire and rain. A good place to start is President Trump angrily tweeting about the California wildfires being the fault of poor land management, despite, of course, the fact that it was all federal lands. Scott, even for him, let's put it this way. I know people who are outwardly Trump supporters, and then some are a little bit more quiet about it. But even they were like, "Yeah, I don't. Sometimes I just don't know what gets into him, you know." And like that was just stupid, you know. So for Trump supporters to say that, that means for people who are not Trump supporters, it's so many levels beyond just plain old stupid, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean. First of all, it was a new low for him, and it was basically the line that if you thought I was over the edge already of being annoyed and angry with him, this one put it to a whole new level. Because you just don't do that in the middle of absolute devastation right now. I think the latest death count is 42 people, and there's still more. And you have more than 7,000 structures and towns basically burned to the ground, and that's the time you choose to make any comments, even if you were 100% correct. And there was some forest management issue, which, first of all, it wasn't even forest to begin with because a lot of it was grasslands and other areas that have nothing to do with forest. So it was ill-informed to begin with. But even if it was 100% correct, you just do not go in the middle of a disaster and make a comment like that. It was beyond inappropriate, and you can see that it was beyond inappropriate because he's tried to make up for it now in his subsequent tweets and like, God bless firefighters and everybody, and we're there to help and we're with you all the way. Because he even realized at this point that it went far beyond him. There were a couple of them from earlier that I knew that somebody else had written those tweets. It wasn't him.
Yeah, and my theory is that sometimes there are advisors to him, and sometimes they get in his ear and they're like, "Yeah, this is a good time to make a point about this."
Right.
And he's like, "Yeah, you're absolutely right." Yeah. And he probably doesn't think there's anything wrong with the tweet even now, but he's like, "Oh, it was received really badly, like really, really badly." Right, so let me try and figure out what to do about it. People who like me are mad about it, so that people who don't like me are mad. That's exactly what I want. So what he had said was, and this is on Twitter, there is no reason for these massive, deadly, and costly forest fires in California, except that forest management is so poor. Billions of dollars are given each year with so many lives lost, all because of gross mismanagement of the forest. Remedy now are no more federal payments. And, it seems like it was caused by I believe the power companies, both of the fires, the one closer to here and then the one in Paradise, California. The understanding is it was possibly, at least, sparks from power lines, which had been identified as a problem earlier.
Right.
But as you said, his subsequent tweet was, "The California firefighters, FEMA, and first responders are amazing and very brave. Thank you, and God bless you all." So, so it's a little bit of a different tone there. And, I think also, you're in France. You're supposed to be, doing important business. Just send that second one. That second one is fine. That should go out. You know, that should be the only thing you say about it. It's like, if you want to put in, we're ready to help, great. Yeah. But if you're not ready to help, then, just be like, oh, someone will help you. Well, Jerry Brown should help you. You'd say that if you don't,
exactly. Like, where's Jerry Brown or something? But we knew it was political. But the thing that was also frustrating about it is even if California will never politically be on the same side as Trump when it comes to most things. He's also forgetting that there are a lot of his supporters that are in a lot of these areas. And if he is going to play the political game, which he shouldn't be, to do that is discounting them as well. Yeah. And in a time of absolute crisis was really unforgivable. And he's done quite a few where you're just like, I cannot believe you said that. But this was one of the more crass ones that really was ill-timed and incredibly inappropriate that I think, like you said, he's had to backtrack so much now because of that.
Look, I don't know if Kanye's house burned down, but I do know that some of his wife's family's houses did burn down. So, right there, these are your people.
Right.
These are people who are going to help you fundraise in 2 years.
Yeah, that you're going to need it.
Some would say fundraising for a re-election campaign. Scott would say fundraise for a get out of jail. Yeah. But either way.
For your lawyers.
Yeah.
You're going to need a lot of lawyers.
Well, personally, I don't think President Trump should have been so hard on the California fires because he has a lot in common with the California wildfires. First and foremost, their only real natural enemy is rain. And President Trump did indeed cancel well, he didn't cancel it. He just didn't go to a World War I service at a cemetery where American soldiers were buried, commemorating 100 years since the end of, at that time, what was called the Great War, which was like, Germany was like, it's a popular thing from a meme, but Germany was like, okay, hold my beer.
Yeah.
You think that was a great war?
Yeah.
Watch this. But so he didn't go because of the weather. He's blaming the Secret Service now. So I think that they probably thought that, the rain is gonna make it hard to protect you. So, and what I did enjoy were all the tweets that went out of. First, it was just Obama talking in the rain. Then it was just other politicians, and then it was just people speaking in the rain. Rock bands performing in the rain. I mean, I went to the Vans Warped Tour one year when I was much younger. I saw the band Fishbone just pouring. It was a lot of fun, and they only did 4 songs, but they did 4 songs. And so I guess the band Fishbone is tougher than President Trump. Again, do you think that Secret Service was really worried about the rain? Look, if it's like a hurricane, I get it.
Sure.
But then the event wouldn't have happened. So everybody spoke except him.
Right.
Right. So do you think it's fake news that the Secret Service told him not to go?
Of course, 1,000%. I mean, we know that, and he can never take responsibility for anything that he has done to say, hey, look, you know what? I thought it was going to be really bad. I thought maybe he could have even said, I didn't think other people were going to go. Because of the weather, so we made the decision to stay back. Whatever, you could have come up with a better line than of course, like he normally does, pushing the blame on someone else.
Melania didn't want me bringing a flu into the house.
Exactly.
There's a lot of excuses. When all else fails, blame your wife. That's probably what he could have done. Now, he did appear at other events where I guess they were either indoors or the weather was better.
Or they were covered.
And at one of them, both Macron, which is definitely fun to say,
it is,
and Merkel both took shots at him.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. I mean, for people who don't like Trump, it's and there's a lot of them.
Right.
That was probably fun. Did you see any of their comments? What they had to say?
I saw Macron's and
see,
and
it is fun.
It is. And
everybody in the audience, try it now. Macron.
Say it 3 times fast.
In France, they sell Kraft Macron and cheese. Oh no, and Macron and fromage.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of that.
Yes,
I'm glad Tamra's not
fromage,
here. Tamra would have
fromage
shook her head at that one.
And Macron.
Yeah.
Macron.
Macron and fromage. Anyway. And I don't know. Sorry.
The other great one too is they had this great meme going back to the rain thing, and they had the Queen, 92-year-old, and her amazing outfit too. I was like, look at her, putting a whole new spin on the Yes Queen, because she was just rocking it that night. So even the 92-year-old Queen could go out.
If there's anybody who needs to not go out in the rain, it's a 92-year-old Queen.
But she was out there.
Who I think at this point, Queen Elizabeth is trying to outlive Prince Charles.
I think she is too.
So that he never gets to be
Exactly.
king. She just wants it to go right to William.
Yes. Yeah, because I think he turned 70 today, or around this week. He's turning 70 or 71. So you think about that.
Just imagine how long he's been thinking this has to happen, right? At some point, I'm going to be the king.
Yeah, and both the parents are still around too, because Prince Philip is like 97 or something.
Yeah, no, I know, exactly.
But I did see some of that, and then of course I saw Trump's tweets this morning going back and basically trying to make fun of Macron too, which was ridiculous. It's just ridiculous to have these back and forth arguments with our best allies, and it just shows how far that we have sort of fallen now under this presidency. So,
yeah, no, I mean, we don't have a lot of friends anymore, you know, and I think that we should do what we can to try and keep them. But I don't know. I think France and Germany were never going to be friends of President Trump anyway.
No, that is true.
So let's see. So there was one other thing that I did want to focus on before we get to some more domestic matters. Well, you know, let's shift over to that right now. Actually, is Scott, you are a native son of the state of Florida.
Yes,
and I have to ask, what the hell is going on there? That it's like, it seems worse than 2000's recount. You know, I mean, you had really bad optics where people were like holding up ballots to the light in 2000.
Yeah.
And, you know, you had the butterfly ballot.
Yeah.
Which, do they still use the butterfly
they
ballot?
do not use the butterfly ballot anymore.
So, well, at least there's that. But I don't know. This recount seems worse run than the one 18 years ago.
Yeah. Well, the ironic thing is, Brendan Snipes, who everyone keeps talking about, was actually appointed by Governor Jeb Bush, a Republican, back after 2000 and like 2002. But the difference between this time and last time is taking Broward County and Palm Beach County out of the equation, is that this is the first time ever that they've had simultaneous recounts in both the governor's race and the Senate race. And they're doing agriculture commissioner too, which is the third race, because the each one was so close, so razor thin close. They've now had to do recounts statewide, so it's not even just including Broward and Palm Beach; it's the entire state.
So when you recount the ballot, you recount everything on that ballot, right? Or do you only look at the races that?
No, only the races that were below the threshold, which in this case was below a 0.5%.
Now, this might sound like a dumb question, but because it's Florida, I need to know. In the course of a recount, are you recounting the the governor's race and the Senate race at the same time, or do you do all the governor and then you got to go back and do all the other one?
They're doing it basically one at a time, because they have to go through and get it, because both of them are different amounts too.
No,
So they have to go through and count
like
it.
if somebody's got a ballot in their hand, you know, check
off
mark
both.
here, check mark
because they have
there.
to do the agricultural commissioner as well, because that one was also close for the
Who
state.
really cares about the agriculture commissioner?
No, but I'm just saying. I mean,
no, you're right.
It's showing how close that the election was. I mean, when you think out of 8 million votes cast, and especially the Senate race, we're only talking about 15,000 votes separating the two from 8 million. Is pretty crazy. And same thing, I mean, really, if you look across the board nationwide, was kind of crazy just how split it really was. I'm just disappointed with Florida, because I thought they would have moved a little more blue this race. But, you know, now that they've allowed felons and other people to gain their rights to vote back, and now you're going to a presidential year in 2020, I think it'll be a lot closer. But it's like Rick Scott, and the thing is, they're playing the Trump playbook now in Florida too. They're calling it fraudulent. There has been no shown cases right now that there is fraud going on in Palm Beach, Broward County. The only reason why they don't like it is because they're heavily Democratic counties. If it was the other way around and they were doing, you know, that's the thing that drives me nuts, the hypocrisy. If it was the other way around and they were below, they'd won every single vote count and they would go back through. And
Rick Scott essentially oversees this whole process.
Like Georgia, it's sort of unfair to know that you have someone who's actively involved with running for their race that's technically overseeing it as the chief executive of the state. So you have a conflict of interest right there. And the same thing with Georgia, with Secretary of State Brian Kemp running for the governor's race, and you have that same issue going on. So it is a little crazy to see that. You know, Florida's being Florida, though. I mean, you know, and part of the reason why is because we have the rules on the books with recounts, which California does not have that on the law. It's state by state, so not every state has this recount law. It just happens to be in Florida. And then we've seen it because of 2000, just how evenly split the electorate is. Every year. I mean, when you look at all the past previous races since 2000, each candidate for statewide office is pretty much, for presidential level and everything, has won their races by about 1%. That's how close it is in Florida. And that goes back to Rick Scott's both elections as governor, goes back to Obama's wins, it goes back to George W. Bush's win in 2004, and obviously in 2000 it was 500 votes difference. So you see that the electorate's pretty split.
Yeah, and I would say that in some way, Florida would be kind of a microcosm of the country as a
Right.
whole. It's just that close,
Right.
and it's really stayed that close.
And people come from all over
Yeah.
too. So you go down
Yeah,
to South Florida, you get people from all over the world, but you get people from the Northeast, and then Central Florida comes from the Midwest, and then you have Northern Florida, which is more like the deep South of the country too, where you have more of the conservative base. So you have, like you said, quite a microcosm of the entire country in one state, and that's why it's pretty close.
my mom has 5 sisters, and I think the total of 3 or 4 of them all live in Florida now. So
Yeah.
they're
all
everybody's
start
going
going
from the
south.
Northeast. Yeah, exactly. And look, I get the idea of moving south, but it's just like, would you want to live somewhere like Orlando where it rains every afternoon?
I mean, that's where I'm from. I mean,
every afternoon though.
it's fun.
Yeah,
Tropical.
I don't know. I would take Arizona where it get like, okay, I can deal with the 2 months where it's 117 degrees every couple days. That's just me personally. But hey, speaking of Arizona, there is a recount there that seems to have, or did they?
No, they did not
They didn't
do a
actually do a
recount.
recount.
And
They just had more votes to count.
They had more votes to count, and the difference between Florida and Arizona was that the way that Martha McSally had done her concession speech, I thought was great. It was the Martha McSally we had seen before she decided to latch on to that Trumpian style.
Right, sure.
Because I think if she had managed not to cozy up to that side, which she more or less had no choice during the primaries because she had the tack right to get the primary voters to support her over Joe Arpaio and some of the other crazies that were running. So she was a very moderate Republican, and she was very anti-Trump, and I think that would have played a lot better to Arizonans than her hooking far right and embracing Trump, because I think that at the end of the day is what made her lose. And that should be a warning sign, too, for the Republican Party heading into 2020 when you look at the Southwest and you see how Nevada has basically essentially turned blue with Jackie Rosen and the entire state government and everything being blue. Colorado is entirely blue. New Mexico is entirely blue. And now you see one of the Senate seats that was up in 2018 that was held by a Republican has now gone to a Democrat. And the seat that Martha McSally previously held went to a Democrat. And the seat that Kyrsten Sinema left also went to a Democrat. So you start to see that and you think maybe Arizona's closer in play than we might have thought at the presidential level in 2020. I mean, Doug Ducey, the Republican governor, coasted to re-election, but you see the Secretary of State candidate is also now, which they had called for the Republican, ended up going towards the Democrat now in these last couple of
I think
days.
a lot of times too those local, including governor, that's like, oh yeah, that's our guy.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't think about Republican, Democrat.
Well, and I've said that before too.
Yeah.
Like when it comes to governors, you statewide tend to have a lot more variables, and people aren't voting straight hardcore ticket for that. And case in point is Massachusetts with Charlie Baker, who was a Republican and ran and won by 30-something points last week in Massachusetts, and a lot of New England governors are Republican. So yeah, a lot of times you don't end up voting party. You vote for the candidate more at governor level. But still, the fact that you had a Republican candidate win by over a 250,000 votes for governor, but then you saw that Kyrsten Sinema ended up winning the Senate and the Secretary of State going to Democrats. You see that there is a little bit of a split there too.
Right, and this was just sort of a matter of counting all the votes as they came in. I guess absentee and
right,
provisional and all that.
And Maricopa County, which and Cocosino County, which is where part of Sedona is, which is more of a Democratic bastion. Not a huge population, but has a lot of Democratic votes there. Was a little bit slow coming in, but Maricopa is where Phoenix is, and that's where the treasure trove of votes are coming in, and that's what eventually.
I
puts
wonder
Sinema
what
over
the
top.
percentage of total votes cast in the state of Arizona or in Phoenix, because I've been to Phoenix. And, and it's just this huge metropolitan area, and then the rest of it, I feel like if you know Snoopy's brother Spike just hanging out on the cactus, it's just that's the rest of Arizona to me. If you're an Arizonan, tell me if I'm wrong, because maybe I am. And Kristen, it's Kyrsten Sinema.
Kyrsten, yeah.
But obviously that's significant. Because I get a lot of my news from the Howard Stern show. I did not realize, but she's openly bisexual.
Yeah.
And that was not something that I was aware of. And I feel like a lot of times that sort of thing is made an issue of. Positively by the people in favor of a candidate, but definitely negatively by people who are trying to run. And I don't know. I didn't follow that race that closely, but I just wasn't aware of that. But that's significant because she's the first openly bisexual what is she?
Senator.
Senator, yeah. Sorry.
Senator-elect, yeah. And well, it's the same thing with Kate Brown, who won re-election in Oregon. And then you look at Jared Polis, who won governor in Colorado, who's openly gay. So it was great. Again, when you go back and look at LGBT candidates, people of color, women, just had a absolutely fantastic night across the board. And we've seen the elections has continued to tilt more and more towards the Democrats as the week has gone on and more votes have come in. And that's here as well in California with the House races. And, you know, even with the how close it was in Texas and Florida and Georgia, even if all those go to Republicans, you can see that progressive candidacies worked in the Deep South with Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum, thinking they went full on progressive and basically lost by a sliver. So it's very impressive and good to see when you're thinking about presidential candidates and Senate candidates and everything in 2020 on what Democrats should be looking for after seeing how well progressives did in 2018.
Right, and it's just very progressive, lower P, just of the voters that, you know, that for a major national office, they voted for someone who's openly bisexual.
And it was not a big deal.
It
wasn't really, like you said, you didn't even know about it. It wasn't brought up as a
I don't live in that
to
state,
or
obviously,
from.
because I think it all looks like cactuses and tumbleweeds, so clearly I don't live there. But, you know, I felt like I would have heard of that because of the fact that, you know, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would feel like, you know, not opponents, but, you know, the PACs that, you know, quote unquote, unofficially support an opponent, you know, because I heard like terrible calls being made throughout the, you know, just recordings of those robocalls.
Right.
Just with, you know, like Amos and Andy accents.
Right, for Andrew
just
Gillum.
like,
and
like
for
all the stuff that
Stacey,
you're just like, like not only like, wait, somebody actually set up with that robocall, but you're like, someone recorded that?
I know.
You know, and I don't
insane.
know. Yeah. So, you know, so I don't know. It sort of becomes a more significant story for that reason. But I guess that just to touch back on Florida for a quick second, I do like the point that President Trump keeps making is like, what is with all these ballots that just keep showing up out of nowhere? And it's like, well, they're called absentee ballots, and it's the mail, and they come in. Now, I do understand that there have been races, and I don't mean necessarily in Florida. Like, I always found it very suspicious that Al Franken won after, you know, a box of ballots turned up in the trunk of somebody's car. You know, and I was just like, okay. I mean, I guess. Now, you might not have the answer, but I had it asked to me by my boss, comedian Dennis Miller. He doesn't know of, you know, these kinds of long protracted recounts, apart obviously from 2000 presidential election. That, you know, that all these extra votes that get found and brought in late benefiting Republicans, but I'm certain that it's happened. I just couldn't think of any, because the only other example I could think of was the aforementioned Al Franken one.
Yeah, but again, the thing that happens that's a little bit different, and it's just voting patterns, and it has nothing to do with finding ballots and just marking them for Democrats and they're cheating or whatever. What happens is Republicans tend to vote early, and then they're there on election day, whereas Democrats tend to show up on election day and then vote either absentee or mail-in ballot, and a lot of those come in later. And then when you think of you know, the troops based overseas, a lot of the military tends to vote Republican too. So it was kind of ironic when Trump's like saying, "Oh, let's not count any more votes that, you know, anything mail-in ballots, that it's too late now after election day." Well, I was thinking a lot of those people end up tending to be more Republican voters in the military, just generally speaking. Yeah. And so it was foolish of him again to get involved. And then you have both Marco Rubio and Rick Scott getting involved. And on the other hand, you see how well it went for Arizona, where, you know, Republicans were trying to tell Martha McSally, don't concede, you know, fight this like they're doing in Florida. And she went the other tack and gave a great concession speech. The governor gave a great message on Twitter. Jeff Flake gave a great message as the outgoing Republican senator. And that's the way it should be done. That's the way it always happened in the past. The peaceful kind of transfer of power and the fact that, okay, the election is over. But instead, you know, Republicans in Florida are trying to go after this. There's fraud, there's fraud, there's fraud. And they're saying that, and they are correct. Bill Nelson could go and say, you know, for the best of the state, I'm not going to require the recount. However, he also has every right to do the recount under law. That would happen. He could stop it, yes, but under law, they do have a right to do that. So if I was him or any candidate that were the numbers are that close, I would think that you would want to make sure that those numbers are accurate and you're getting every vote counted before you say, okay, I'm done, especially when it's allowed under the law. Why would you not want to do that? And I know that if the tables were turned and it was Rick Scott down by 12 or 15,000, he would want that as well, and he would be doing that. So it's a little bit hypocritical that Republicans are not wanting to do that and saying he could stop it, which yes, he could, but he should, under law, be able to make sure everything's counted for. And as we've seen, Rick Scott has tried to do multiple frivolous lawsuits the past few days, and the judges have shot it down each time by saying there hasn't been any known fraud going on. And yes, I think Brenda Snipes probably should step down after this because there's been a lot of controversy around her. But again, it's ironic considering that Rick Scott had the opportunity to get rid of her as governor and never did. And it was appointed by a Republican governor in 2002 by Jeb Bush. And nobody has gotten rid of her in 16 years. So again, you can't now cry foul when you're feeling like things aren't happening when you've had the opportunities throughout the years to make changes and you never did. So,
right, it's like Mueller being appointed by a Republican.
Exactly, across the board, all Republicans. So it's a little bit hypocritical to then come back later and act like there was nothing you could do about it when you've had the governorship for the past 20-something years and you could have changed things. And she's been there for 16 years. So,
talking about sort of more progressive thinking, let's talk about the opposite of that, which is in the Mississippi runoff. That'll be happening in November 27th. So I suppose, let's see. So Mississippi Senator, her name is Cindy Hyde Smith. And she is running against a black Democrat, Mike Espy. And so she's on film saying, not talking about Espy, obviously, but saying, if he invited me to a public hanging, I'd be on the front row. Do you think in a state like Mississippi, this will have an impact? Because for me, it's like people will be upset and, you might get some more votes towards Espy, but I just feel like, to me, Mississippi's always going to vote for Republicans.
Yeah, I think it's challenging. I mean, on one hand, you saw where people were not voting in Alabama, last year for Roy Moore, and Doug Jones was able to squeak out a win by something like 20,000 votes. The thing with Mississippi, though, is the population isn't huge, sort of like Alabama. So, if you do have people that aren't feeling motivated to vote because they feel like, okay, we've already got the Senate in Republican hands and, it's a Tuesday after Thanksgiving and maybe you're not going to get the turnout, and the African-American community and especially black women are incredibly mobilized to vote, you could see a surprise there because their runoff one was very close. It was only, several thousand votes apart. So you could see a surprise like that. But yes, if I was just to bet and say this is the standard weighted way that Mississippi goes, I think, yes, her comments were definitely inappropriate and stupid. But I think, the way it is, even Georgia, I thought there was going to be a much better chance that Stacey Abrams was going to be able to overtake Brian Kemp. It doesn't look like it now. Maybe when the last absentee ballots come in and everything, they'll get them just below 50% and they'll go to a runoff.
They'd go to an actual runoff if it's but they're too close for her to look like she'd outright win it at this point.
No, she wouldn't outright win it, but what she's trying to do is get it down to 49.9, just get it right under the wire so they have to go to runoff on December 4th. But the point is, I still think that the numbers still would favor Hyde Smith over Espy. But again, there could be a surprise there, depending on the motivation of Republicans knowing like, okay, well, we have the Senate in the bag, and we're disappointed with her, and maybe some of those people in Jackson and some of the bigger cities would feel less inclined to get out and vote, and then you get a large African-American turnout. We could see a twist. We could see a surprise. So really, when you look at the Senate map, considering this was the best map for Republicans or really any major party over the past half century, and you see really overall was kind of mixed for them. They picked up very red seats, which wasn't a surprise. You go back to North Dakota, you see Kramer was statewide recognition as being the only congressman from the state, so everybody knew him. And you knew that, when Heidi had voted no on Kavanaugh, that was going to be a thing. But, so that wasn't a surprise. Missouri's incredibly red. And again, you had a statewide candidate with Hawley that everybody knew as Attorney General. And then same thing with Indiana, a very red state. No surprises. Florida, a little more surprised because it's so 50-50. And but neither candidate was really that great. I think a lot of people were probably done with Bill Nelson being there for 18 years. And, they knew Rick Scott, and he has a ton of money, and he spent a lot of money on this race. But you see the other two states, again, like we were talking about earlier, you see Nevada and you see Arizona flip 2 Republican seats. You really only end up with +1 if you get Rick Scott, and you keep it all the same if you get Mississippi. So you're really not looking at a big increase in the map for the Senate when they had such great odds for Republicans. So, a lot of conservatives were saying this was such a great night because they kept the Senate. And yeah, it would have been, but the percentage of Democrats getting the Senate back was basically crazier odds than Donald Trump winning the presidency. It was down to like 10%, and I think Donald Trump was like 16% or whatever. So the odds were even more difficult for Democrats to pick up the Senate. So it's not a surprise in any shape or form. It's just kind of a bummer that they picked up an extra 2 seats for Democrats, because now that gives a little more padding, and it also makes it more challenging in 2020 when they have to go back and now try to pick off 4 seats.
Yeah, so these are all things that we'll keep a close eye on in the weeks ahead. I wanted to move it over to CNN, who earlier today sued I guess they sued the White House in general, or they sued President Trump to get Jim Acosta's press pass returned because it was revoked after the widely reported incident last week where, his questioning was something that the president wasn't happy with, and there are videos that show, either any video you see like basically an intern trying to take the microphone away from him, and he doesn't want it. Now, how forceful he was about that depends on what you want to see. My thought on this is that regardless of how crude and inappropriate a president can be at sometimes, I feel like that position, being in that room, you're still essentially a guest, and if you're rude to a president, let's say it's not this president, you could be kicked out of the room just for that. Before it even escalated to that point, look, I'm surprised that Trump had kept Jim Acosta around as long as he had. This was probably an excuse that he was looking for. But, it's he's certainly not being respectful of the office of the president. I know that you have to make that distinction because of the person who's in that office. So I think they're within their rights to take it away. What are your thoughts on the whole thing, though, Scott, about the back and forth, the questions, and, the interaction with the young lady who tried to take the microphone, all of that?
I mean, I thought the whole thing was kind of a zoo to begin with. I mean, he was all over the place in the press conference. I watched pretty much all of it, and granted, we've seen his behavior shift over the past week, because regardless of what he says or not, and
those of you watching on YouTube are seeing it right now. And this is not the zoomed in with the red filter, which I saw. Because I think Sarah Sanders sent out the version that they used on InfoWars.
Oh my God, I know.
But this is essentially just a replay of what it was. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, I think even if you were to say, like, her movement was a little bit aggressive too, and didn't necessarily need to go and try to grab the microphone too.
I'm sure whoever is her boss said go get that.
Right. But I think that was also an aggressive move that put him in a place where, regardless of whatever doctored video you're looking at or whatnot, I don't think it was right of them to try to grab that out. I don't think that, again, he was looking for the excuse because he didn't like Jim Acosta.
Yeah.
That this was what he needed. And I think that it does still set a dangerous precedent, because it should be open to all reporters. And, his rudeness to reporters is just ridiculous. I mean, when someone was asking him on the outside before he flew off to go to France and asking about the Mueller investigation, and he's basically, that's a stupid question.
And he said, I watch you a lot.
Yeah,
you ask a lot of stupid questions. And by the way, he probably doesn't watch her a lot.
No.
I don't even know what outlet she was in with. That's not to belittle who she is. It wasn't like, I'm trying to think of it. It wasn't like Jake Tapper. It wasn't somebody that you see a lot.
I mean, my whole thing is they don't really give great press conferences anyways with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. So I'm like, why does the whole media, except maybe this, should not even show up at all? Because it's getting to the point where it's kind of a circus regardless. And I get it. He's very hostile towards the media, which makes them hostile towards him. So I think the whole thing got out of hand. I think they probably should file the lawsuit, because it sets a bad precedence for the freedom of the press. It's just a slippery slope, because when you start going there and then you start talking about who else you don't like that might say something or ask a question, or you feel like the questions are stupid and you're going to rescind it, it starts to be a slippery slope on now only having friendly reporters there. So that would be my only concern, is that it's a rather dangerous thing to do. And we'll see what happens with the lawsuit and you know, how that ends up going. But I don't agree with them rescinding it to him. They could have said you're banned or you're suspended for 30 days or whatever it is, to just say, you know, we're putting our point out there, but to basically say you're outright banned.
Yeah, I mean, you could have also, and I know that just from talking to people who have worked in that room, at one point, that's actually what Jake Tapper did during the Obama administration, and he used to be a guest on the radio show. But it's that seating is so like locked in for like, you know, decades. You know, like who gets which seat? You know, I know a woman who's a reporter for the Las Vegas Review Journal, and her seat is really far back. And I think I talked to her after she'd been there for a year, and she's like, "Oh, yeah, I got to ask one question." You know, so so my point on that being like, it could have been like, okay, so Acosta's seat actually doesn't get to be that close anymore, right? You know,
something like that. Like you said, because Helen Thomas, I remember reading her book and about how she had to, you know, move her way up, and you know, it became a fixture there. But it was the same thing, and it's just kind of fascinating when you see where everyone's at. And
she was always in the front. Yeah, in me being aware of that room, she was always in the front.
Well, no, she was, but it took a while for her to get up there, and then she was just a fixture that everybody, no matter what, knew. And you're right, the seats are very specific, and it's very hard, and you have a very certain limited amount of time to ask your questions. And then they move on to the next one, and that's your one chance to get what you want out, and so it can be frustrating for anybody in the media.
It's kind of like trying to make a point on the Trump report. Yeah. It's very hard. I do. Before we run out of time, I do want to talk about something that happened after last week's show.
Oh yeah, that too.
Which is Jeff Sessions. For those that are watching, I'm using air quotes. His resignation. And look, I've never been particularly fond of Jeff Sessions. You know, anything that I've seen from him in public. I have to say I really like the way he started his letter. His resignation letter that starts, "At your request, I am submitting my resignation." So basically he's saying, I'm not resigning. You fired me. But anyway, here's the letter that you told me to write. This isn't really a surprise. But and the timing made sense. You know, just don't do it before the election, basically.
Right.
Give us your thoughts on the firing of Jeff Sessions and what you think that means going forward, especially as it pertains to the Mueller investigation.
Well, look, like you said, we all knew it was coming. It was not a surprise. We knew they were going to wait till after the election. It was quite comical almost that it was immediately after the press conference.
The morning after, it was like the alarm was set.
Yeah, after the press conference, too, it was like, okay, have your letter turned in so he can do this rambling, crazy press conference, and then the letter can go out. Look, we knew it. I was not a fan of Jeff Sessions either. I thought he was a throwback to an earlier era. I thought that everything he did was opposite of what I'd want an attorney general to do. That being said, surprisingly, and that's what it gets, you get the weird kind of bedfellows there when you think about the never Trumper Republicans that I'm friends with, and we have a lot in common. It's the same thing. Like, I thought that he at least handled the Russian investigation in a very appropriate way, and had said at one point, I'm not letting politics get involved. And again, as much as I couldn't stand him, I thought he's still having that throwback to the 50s. He still had that old school kind of mentality of like how things should be run and proper, and knowing that he's not like working for a dictator. But this is a very big issue because we know that, and instead of what normally happens is the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, would have normally then been acting AG until someone could be appointed. He throws in Matthew Whitaker. He just throws in somebody else in there as acting AG, which again, we're going to find out if that's even going to be legal. That's a whole other story. So if that's going to even be a legal appointment.
Him being even acting Attorney General might not be legal.
Correct, because of the whole having to be approved by the Senate, within a certain number of years, because he was originally a U.S. attorney in Iowa back during the Bush administration, but that was over a decade ago. So some of the rules and laws that are in place, so that way, again, presidents don't have too much power of just being able to put anyone in place there, means that there's a good chance that that appointment is not actually a legal appointment. And you saw even Kellyanne Conway's husband had teamed up and said this is illegal. When you have, so there are definitely a lot of questions with that, and again we know, and people could say it's a witch hunt and everything else, but that exactly the whole reason why Jeff Sessions left was because he recused himself in the Russian investigation. And even if Trump thinks he's innocent, he doesn't like anyone going into his business and knowing about his financials and other things that are going on, because we know he's not 100% clean, regardless if it's Russia or not, with those financial deals. And he does not like having the power taken away from him and having people know his business. So regardless, he did not like that. He's putting in someone else who seems to be anti-Mueller investigation, which is the whole reason why he's there. And for anyone to think otherwise is really drinking some great Kool-Aid. I want to know what they're having and what's been slipped into it, because they're in fantasy land.
I want to make sure we talk about one more thing. So just your gut reaction. Do you think that Whitaker puts an end to the Mueller investigation? And if so, will that hold any kind of legal challenge?
I don't think he's going to, because I think that would, again, add too many people, even Republicans, a little uneasy if he was to outright end it. He could try to do a lot of other things like, cut off the money, keep the report private. But the issue is now, which, again, is going to affect Trump, is the fact that the Democrats have the House, which means they have subpoena power.
Yeah.
But you go back and you watch like Watergate. I was watching Watergate on History Channel, and it was this amazing 6-part documentary. It was hours and hours, but it was fascinating to see how similar it is to today with, Congress giving a subpoena and Nixon ignoring the subpoena and the Supreme Court saying, well, we really can't force him to go to do the subpoena and all the things that they were trying to go around and firing the attorney generals. I'm like, my God, we're basically seeing the same thing today with a similar type of president who's paranoid and wants full power and everything else. So I don't think he'll just try to chip away at what the investigation is doing. But I think now having Democrats in the House is going to be able to open up a lot of doors now that it's going to make it quite miserable for this administration for the next 2 years, because now they can do investigations of their own. They can ask subpoena for the report when it's done. They can bring Mueller in under testimony, under oath. So there's a lot of other things they can do now and really at this point the investigation has been going on long enough that I think Mueller's already been prepared for that, right, knowing what could happen, and that he already has a big chunk of what he needs now to do what he needs to do.
And I think if they try to stop the funding on the Mueller investigation, that might be the biggest Kickstarter in history to help fund.
Exactly.
All right, we only have 2 minutes, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg apparently working from home after her fall.
Yeah.
Your thoughts when you saw the headline that she found?
Well, the crazy part was I'd actually talked to a coworker of mine the day before and said, we just need to bubble wrap her and take her everywhere, and someone needs to have security with her 24/7, and then she falls and breaks ribs in her own office. So I'm like, yes, I'm still about bubble wrapping her and taking her around, because all she needs is another 2 years, and then I say the day after the election, once we know who wins, then she can say she's resigning in January.
Oh yeah. I was going to say, well, don't resign.
No, not in November, but after the election, say, okay, now that I know who's there, I'm resigning on January 20th.
I mean, she clearly has staff and aides and things.
Course.
So how is it possible that she can even fall?
I know.
So they maybe start carrying her around.
That's what I said. So you just have her carried around, bubble wrap.
Like the way that they would carry the Egyptian pharaohs, just like up and just march in like that.
She's a crazy night owl. Probably works late, and she probably tells her staff like go home to your families, and works late because she doesn't have a family to go back to, and was probably in her office by herself, and it was dark, and those things happen. So I'm glad she's doing better. She's out of the hospital. It's good. So she's got to keep going for another 2 years.
All right. Well, again, we will continue our Ruth Bader Ginsburg Health Watch weekend.
2018.
And into 2019. Here on the Trump Report. Anyway, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for everybody who joined us. There was a very lively chat going on. We weren't able to get you in the conversation. My apologies for that. But Scott, where do people find you?
You can find me on Twitter if I can get back on at some point at sman80.
I do think you're shadow banned by Mitch McConnell. You can find me at ChristianDMZ on Twitter and Instagram, and the Trump Report is at Trump Report ABTV. And one of the shows that I host, Marvel TV Weekly, Sunday at 10 Pacific, we'll be doing a special commemoration of the passing of the great Stan Lee. Mm-hmm. So please check that out, and we will see you all next week.
Our founder, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and me, Maria Menounos, would like to thank you for tuning in to AfterBuzz TV. Remember, we're not just the first, we're the biggest in the world, and we're the only destination for all your favorite TV shows. Whatever you crave, we've got it. So go to AfterBuzzTV.com and check out our lineup. Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.